Hi, welcome to Seaside Quilting Tutorials. Today I am starting a whole cloth piece that I want to practice on, and I wanted to take just a couple moments to show you how to use the full line stencil. This fabric is beautiful. It is the Star hand dyed fabric sold by Seaside Quilting Supplies. I've taken 2 fat quarters and I've sewed them together. And to get started, I wanted to do a medallion in the center. This can be hard to create in free motion quilting so that it's even all the way around in a circle. So I'm going to start with the medallion and then I'll work my way out and do some freehand stuff. So I just wanted you to see how the full line stencils work. I'm using a quilt pouncer. This is also by the Full Line Stencil Company. These are really nice stencils because there are no holes, and once you go over it with the chalk that's on the pad, it will leave the print down there for me so that I can follow the design and then I can work around it and do my own thing. So in order to use the Pouncer, we just tap it 3-4 times, and then you'll take your Pouncer out and your pad will be covered with chalk. Now I don't really have to bang on this. I'm just going to gently pounce over the lines, and you can even just smooth over the lines after you've pounced a little bit. And to take off some of the excess chalk, I'm just going to go over it like this, just holding it tightly at one side so it doesn't shift or move while I'm doing it. And I'm just going to go over it again one more time just to make sure that I have the print down really nice. And then I'll lift one side just to make sure of how I've got my design down. And I'm going to go over this section just a little more. This is a little tricky with the coloring because some of it goes kind of light. But the white chalk will be the best choice, I think, for this. And you can pounce it a little bit just to get a little more chalk on there. You don't want to pounce it too much because it sends the chalk dust into the air and you don't want to be breathing that in. I'm going to check it one more time. And I feel like I have a nice solid print that I can follow. Now it left some dust around the edge, and that's fine. That's not a problem. Now when you look at the stencil, you can almost see through where the print is. And that's where the chalk will easily go through, but it's a solid piece. It's really a unique type of stencil, and I really enjoy these a lot. Now I can just set that aside. And your next step that you're going to want to do, I've got a couple of threads sticking up on me. So I'm going to trim those so that they're out of my way and they don't get stitched into the piece. So I'm going to take a look at my design. Each one of them is a little bit different in how you will maneuver around them. Some you can see a definite direction. This one is a intertwining heart medallion. So I'm going to start in one of these points. And what I do is I just take my finger and I look at the design and see which way will I be able to do the design and have it come out in a nice way. Now, it's not my objective to stay on every line exactly. If I veer off the line a little bit, it doesn't matter. This is just a guide for me to follow. Now at Seaside Quilting Supplies, we also have some whole cloth pieces that have feathers on them, ribbon candy on them, and different designs all over printed out. You can cut them out in different squares and use them individually, or triangles and long sections that you can cut out, and you can practice on them individually, or you can take the whole piece, put a batting there, put your backing and sandwich it up, and you can practice on it. And it's really nice to practice on something that's been printed for you, even if you have some fabric that has large flowers. Those are great to practice on because they give you some definite lines to follow, and then you could work inside of those to create different designs. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stitch on this a little bit. I'm not going to talk a lot while I'm stitching, but I will point out that I do feel that for me, if I start in a point here and I follow my design around, this is going to give me the nicest flow. So, I'll concentrate on this for a couple minutes because I definitely want to make sure that I know in what direction I'm going to be going in continually, all the way around. And once I have that set in my mind, then I feel like I can go ahead and I can stitch it out. Now, another thing that you can do with these stencils is you could take some colored paper, you can put your stencil down, pounce it out onto the colored paper, and then sit with a pen and follow the design and practice the design. And then when you go to sit down to do your medallion or whatever stencil you have put, there are corner ones, there are ones that you can create an edge-to-edge design. They have some really beautiful, beautiful stencils. There are such a big variety, from feathers to pumpkins, trees that are edge-to-edge, hearts, all kinds of different designs that you could put them in different areas and work, your way around that way. But I really like those pieces, those panels, those practice panels. They're, I think, 36 by 44 or something like that. I can't remember the price on them exactly, but they're a really good deal for practicing different designs, and you can even quilt in between the spaces, put pebbles in there, different lines in there, and so forth. And it's just a great way to practice. And the same thing with those. You do not need to stay on the lines. The lines are a guide. If you veer a little bit off the lines, the lines are a guide to bring you back into direction of where you need to go. I'm using glide thread, 40 weight, trilobal polyester in the top. And I'm using a bottom line 60 weight. Now, some people will tell you all kinds of different rules when it comes to quilting. And I like to learn the rules, but I also like to learn why the rules are there. And are they rules that I can break, or are they rules that I have to follow 100%? And then there are just some things that are debated. One of them is thread. Now, some will tell you that you must use the same thread at the top and the bottom. You don't. I can guarantee that you don't, because I don't do it. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. It depends on, one, my availability of colors. I like to match my back, and I like to, well, it depends. With a whole cloth piece, I may do the whole piece in one color, and I may change colors throughout. It just depends on what my mind is seeing at the time. The tricky part of using two different colors, one on the top and a different color on the bottom, is that sometimes threads will poke up through if you don't get the right tension. There's a tug of war that goes on with your thread when you're sewing and you're quilting. So some people will use the same color top and bottom, and they don't care what their backing is, and their thread will show up. I like the looks of thread. So sometimes I'll do that, and it doesn't bother me at all, because it's the back of the quilt, so I'm not as worried about it. But sometimes I like to use a different color, and I try to keep them within somewhat shades of each other. So like if I'm going to use white on the top and black on the bottom, I'm definitely going to get some threads poking up through that are going to show. Because of that tug of war, it's really hard to get a perfect tension to keep your threads so that they're between your batting and your fabric, so that none of the white would show through on the bottom and none of the black would show up on the top. That's really hard to achieve. I always keep a practice sandwich next to my machine, and before I start, I always check my tension on my bottom and my top threads. And I do that on my practice piece first, and I try to use something that's going to be similar fabric to what I'm using. And also, if I'm using 2 layers of batting, I will use a practice sandwich that has 2 layers of batting in it. This way I can set my tensions so that I'm getting a nice stitch on the top and a nice stitch on the bottom, and hopefully balancing it out so that the connections are inside where the batting is, and not having some stuck on the bottom, some stuck on the top. If you use the same color top and bottom, you won't notice it as much when that happens, because it'll be the same color. But when you set your tension, you really should use 2 different colors on a practice sandwich, just of the same weight of thread that you're going to use on the top and the bottom. So where I'm using a 60 weight on the bottom and I'm using a 40 weight on the top on my practice sandwich, I would take 2 very different colors and I would practice on there for just a little bit and see how my tension is. And once I have my tension correct, then I'll put in the colors that I'm actually going to use. And that just depends if I'm using a really darker color and a really lighter color that are going to show up if I don't get a really good tension. But you want to have a nice tension because you want to have that good interplay. So in saying that, there are certain rules to learn that you really should follow. Tension is one of them. You can change up your thread depending on how you prefer your thread to look. I love the looks of thread. I love glide thread because it has a sheen to it that really shows up, especially where this is a very matte type fabric. Using the glide on top of it with that nice sheen is going to really show up my thread. on my fabric, and I enjoy that. Now there are times when I want everything to blend and I don't want my thread to show up. I want the quilting to be the big show. So if I've pieced a quilt and that's what I'm trying to show off, I will use a thread that blends and matches my fabrics really nicely so that you're not seeing the thread as much as you're seeing the quilt itself. So that's a rule that I do follow. My machine needs to have a new needle with each big project. Needles are good for approximately 8 to 10 hours, depending on the quality of the needles. And I like to use a quality needle. I like the Schmetz chromium needles. I love titanium needles. And my machine uses regular sewing machine needles, so it's just really handy that the Bernina does that, and I can just use whatever needles I can use in my sewing machine. It's a lot cheaper. It's a lot easier for me. I don't have to carry 2 different types of needles. So that's important to have a good sharp needle that's going to do the right job. I need it the right size for the thread that I'm using. That's important, or I'm going to shred my thread. The other important thing is that this machine, being a long arm, needs to be oiled, and it should be oiled each time that I change my bobbin out, or at least every other time. So those are rules that I need to follow. Now, in learning how to do quilting, one of the things that I learned in the beginning is that you needed to use consistent distance between your stitches and never wear your stitches to touch other stitches. That's a rule to learn and then break it. You don't have to follow that rule. We live in a different time, and that rule doesn't need to be followed. If when you're changing a direction you cross over a thread, it's not a big deal. It is a big deal if it's only 1 or 2 times that you do it, because then it will stand out and it will be noticeable. If it's a thing that you do periodically throughout the quilt, it becomes a consistent thing and will not be noticed. So sometimes when I am needing to get to a different area, I may cross over on a thread, but that's something that I do throughout my quilting, so it's not very noticeable. There are times when I'm doing a design that I do want to have a nice consistency between, and so I'll follow the rule. It just depends on what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. So if I'm doing a big all over meander, I'm going to try to keep my meander even in my spacing so that it looks and flows nicely over my quilt. But if I'm doing what I call a quilted to death type quilting, that needs to stay consistent, believe it or not. And the reason being is because if I do too much quilting in the center and then loosely quilt around the edge, my edges of my quilt are going to ripple, and they're not going to look very pretty. It's going to be hard to square it up, and it's going to create an odd look to it. If I do loose quilting in the center, but very tight and close stitching on the edges, my middle is going to be floppy, and it's going to look very odd, and it's going to stand out when it's washed. So you want to be consistent. If you're going to do a lot of quilting in the center, do a lot of quilting around the edges, and vice versa. So anyways, that's just a little bit about that, and that was actually more than I was planning on sharing, but here we are. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stitch out my medallion, and I'll leave the video running while I'm doing it. Sorry about that. I didn't realize when I moved my camera so that it would be a little bit closer to watch doing the stencil that it had shut off. So I'm going back over the design with some fantastical variegated thread. It kind of gives it a different look when you go over it with a couple different threads. So I'm just going to leave the camera running while I go back over the design so you can see how I worked my way around the stencil design.
Welcome back. Excuse me. This is the finished practice piece that I was playing with the other day, using the Star hand-dyed fabric. This fabric is dyed 10 times and it's washed 10 times. It is just beautiful, beautiful fabric. I started with the medallion in the center and then worked my way around, just free flow, whatever came to mind at the time. There's a combination of Glide 40 weight and Fantastico thread on the top. This was a lot of fun. I like doing pieces like this. This was just 2 fat quarters sewn together. And then I used this batik for the back. I think this makes a cute backing, especially for this coloring of a front. So today I'll be using this piece, which is partly why I was playing with it, and because my goal this year is to make sure that I'm quilting an hour a day, half hour to an hour. Some days it's kind of hard to get behind the long arm and do the quilting. So I'm going to be teaching some binding classes coming up, tutorials, and so I'm going to be using some of my practice pieces. They're not as large as a quilt, so it's a little bit easier to maneuver and show you the different steps. So with this one, I'm going to be showing you facing the quilt, or called knife edge binding, because I would like the quilt, normally when you see a binding, you'll see some binding edge on the front, or where it's sewn to the back by hand, or you'll see an edge where they machine sew it, excuse me, to the back, and then flip it over and machine stitch it to the front. And that leaves a frame going around the whole quilt. And I really don't want this piece to be framed. I want it to be what it is. So I'm going to do the knife edge, and you won't see the binding on the top at all. You'll only see it on the back. So I'm going to go ahead and start doing that tutorial now, but I wanted to finish up and give you a look at the finished quilting. All right, thank you.